And Michael, your battery doesn't appear on. I don't know. Is it on? Is it shut it? Just wait till we're in the shop, because that way they can sit back on. And Anna?
If we just leave, actually, Nick, if we leave that open, we're going to experiment with temperature today.
I don't know if there's going to be any trucks coming back and forth today. So.
Yes. So if there's not, it's great. But if a truck comes,
we might have to close it.
We'll have to close it.
Anna, is your camera actually running? Sorry, I can send it. Yeah.
Okay. Who would like to be a microphone? And Pat. Okay. Now, just revision. Mic runners, please don't adjust anything on the microphone. Only hand to the questioner once we've indicated them. I might have to put my hair back. Yeah. If you're selected for a question, leave your hand up until the mic runner gets to you, and then hold on to the microphone until we've finished answering your question, because you might want to follow up and ask other things in the question, and then hand it back to your mic runner. Okay? I've got a clip. I'll put it back.
It's just not curling around enough. Yeah, that's better.
Okay, good. Good.
Hang on a second. It's just the angle that's all unclear, isn't it?
Done?
That's better.
Good. All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Where are you at? Just a bit of housekeeping. We, as I just mentioned, we'll leave that door open until there's a truck. As soon as there's a truck, if someone could just pop up and close it, and we'll put the AC on. We're just a bit conscious of sounds because we're audio recording everything. So as soon as we turn on the AC, there's a sort of a sound that comes through the recording. And we try to make the environment as least distracting as it can be for people listening to Divine Truth, even on the recordings as well. So that's our rationale there. In that vein, please turn your phones to silent. There was some unloving sin yesterday where people didn't turn their phones on silent, and Jesus had mentioned that first off, so please do that. You're fine to leave them on and record, but please have them on silent at the same time. Okay, I think that's all. We're going to, this morning, I think, I'm just checking with you, that Jesus wants to present for about an hour without any questions. So just to present a bit of material, we're going to do some revision on what we talked about yesterday. And if you can just let him have his reign for that long before you ask questions.
It's too bad if you don't.
We will ignore you. It's just so that we get through the content we want to get through, because often we're getting questions that were going to be answered in the presentation anyway, and it just makes it a little bit more smooth and less disjointed if we can do that first off. So that's the plan. We're going to focus on principles today. We got a bit into the weeds, didn't we, on the particular issues of pets and sex. And I know that everyone freaks out, particularly about the pets. I must say, you either have all very good sex lives, or you were just dismissing that whole thing. And I know which one I think it is. Yeah, but the key thing we're trying to convey in these talks is that we're trying to help you to become sensitive to all of your sin. So not just about pets and sex. So we're trying to guide you through those principles of, okay, what is the loving and equality principle that I would apply to any part of my life to help me detect sin? What is the emotional principles? What are the spiritual principles that I need to look at? So let's see how we go today. We understand it's a good illustration frustration, isn't it? When things get so emotive about a single issue, we can start to see, wow, what am I resisting everywhere? Because just this one issue is creating so much tension in me. Yeah. And I hand it over to my man. I'm sure he's going to expound on that.
Yeah, so I thought one thing I would like to start off with first is that God's feelings about you are that he wants you to be happy and content and eventually reach a state of bliss in your life. That's what he wants for you. He wants to help you do that. And so what he did was he created for the human soul a structure of laws to help you become happy. That's the purpose of the law. The purpose of the law isn't to make your life harder and isn't to make your life more stressful, but actually to bring you some long-term happiness. Now, for many of us, that is, some of us don't want really happiness, so that's an issue, but others of us seek happiness with regard to our addictions and our sin, rather than seeing that our sin is going to be a long-term cause of your sadness rather than your happiness. So, and I think we're going to have to close that door, unfortunately. Yeah. Sorry about that. Whoever's maintaining the temperature, we might, yeah, we just might let it get to sort of warmish, and then we can turn it on. And the longer it stays on, the better it is for us, in the sense that if it stays on a certain period of time, then hopefully we can edit that out of the recording somehow, find the noise of that. But if it's just short bursts, it's a lot harder. So if we can do it that way, that'd be good. And I'll just wait for everyone to come in. We'll leave it closed, I think. Thanks. Yeah. Just gets a bit, you can hear the road noise and everything in the recording straight away. All right, so as I was saying, God wants, a part of what God wants for your life is for you to be happy and enjoy your life. Now, that is not dependent upon you having a relationship with God. God is not trying to force you into a relationship with him. What he would like you to do is to recognize the benefits of a relationship with him, and then to desire those benefits for yourself. As a result of that, he would also like you to recognize for yourself the results of sin in your life and how that affects your relationship with him. But he would like you to do that for yourself. He doesn't want to force you through the process. He wants you to willingly and in desire engage the process of discovery of what's inhibiting your own joy, but also inhibiting your own relationship with God. Now, if it comes to just inhibiting your own joy, and if all you want for your future is to become a perfect man or woman, then you don't need God in the process even, right? You can do it yourself. You can remove sin from your life, and you will, as a subsequent result, be happier. If you remove all your sin from your life, the whole time you're on earth, you will never experience a disease. You will never experience pain in your body if you remove all your sin from your life. And you can do that without God. In fact, there are many people historically who have done that over tens of thousands of years. From the time of Amon and Aman, the first human couple, who many people know as Adam and Eve, from that time, about 180,000 years ago, to now, the majority of people remove sin from their life without involving God in the process of doing it. Of course, God's laws were involved, because they had to discover what those laws were, and then they had to bring their life into harmony with those laws in order to experience happiness. So happiness is definitely going to be in your future one way or the other, whether you want God involved or not. The difference between the relationship with God and not having one is that beyond the sixth sphere, there are the seventh and the eighth and subsequent spheres above that, where you experience even more happiness than the natural man can experience. So you as a perfect person can only experience a certain degree of perfection that is to do with you remaining a person, remaining a human in the fullest sense, and having no part of God enter you. So that's one option. The other option is to have a part of God entering you, God's love entering you, and transforming your soul beyond that state of being human anymore. And that's why we call them angels, because they become more than human because they've now got a part of God's love in them. Now, the whole purpose of having a relationship with God is God wants you to experience the kind of bliss that he experiences. Now, obviously God's infinite and you're never going to get to that point of experiencing what God experiences. But the more love you receive from God, the more you will approach the possibility of that destination. Without God's love, that will not be possible. The only thing possible will be the perfect natural man. And that's in the sixth sphere of the spirit world. But above the sixth sphere, there's the seventh, the eighth, and subsequent spheres, and all of these spheres are additional gradients of love, which are to do with receiving God's love to enter those spheres. And those spheres, you're living in those spheres, is dependent upon how much of God's love you've actually received. So when we talk about a relationship with God, we're talking about what I would classify as the biggest decision you're ever going to have to make in your life. And this decision is going to determine your destiny. Not just your destiny on earth. It's going to determine your destiny after you pass. And if your destiny is such that you do not wish to have the relationship with God the way God defines a loving relationship, if that's your choice, then your destiny will be limited. And the limit of that destiny will be you will arrive only in the sixth sphere of the spirit world and you will progress no further than that. That will be the limit of your destiny. And that limit is the limit which is the perfect natural man, the way God created you to be. You will, when you enter the spirit world and you reach that part of the spirit world, which is the sixth sphere, you will be like what Amon and a man experienced when they were first arrived on earth. You'll be in a beautiful, pristine surrounding. You'll have the ability to move from location to location. In that location, you can go across galaxies. You can visit all sorts of places all through the physical universe, limited to that sphere. And it's a dimensional space where you can just transfer your body, move your body around. You can go from Earth to other places in the universe in this dimension, in this spirit dimensional space, and you can see them all and you can visit them all and you can have a very, very interesting life. But it's limited. So that's what you've got to consider. It's limited because that's the limit of your destiny unless you receive something additional from God, a substance from God. So when we talk about the relationship with God, what we're saying is that God has love and that belongs to God. And that love can be given to the soul only if we desire it. And the desire has to be pure and sincere in order for the love to be given. And you can understand why that is the case, because if you had an impure desire, then naturally there'd be some lying or fakeness about it, which is not going to interest God at all. So when you develop this longing, and that is an exercise, remember yesterday we said, of your free will. When you develop this longing using your own will, so it's not going to be dependent on anything else but your will. It's not going to be dependent on another person. There is no mediator between you and God. It is just you and God. God wants every one of his children to have this potential of this relationship. And if you exercise your free will to be sincere in your longings for God's love will flow into your soul, and the net effect of it is a substance from God is flowing into your natural soul that doesn't have that substance. And the effect of that is that your soul changes. It starts changing. To have, you could say, standards that are way beyond human standards, right? And the more of this love you receive, the more capacity you have also to understand the universe in which you live, and also the more capacity to visit parts of the universe that the perfect natural man cannot visit and will never be able to visit. It makes sense to you? Now, these things, I must say to you, are a scientific fact. Now, for those on earth, it's hard to believe these facts. But once you become a spirit and you start investigating the possibilities of life as a spirit, you'll start to see that these things are facts. Now, Mary and I have had 2,000 years of experience of these facts. And we understand that for most people, when you first hear it, it sounds a bit like far-fetched. And it sounds a bit like, well, you know, how can that really affect my life now? But if you plan for that life now, you will have major benefits when you arrive. And it's like going to any new country, really. It's like, let's say you decide here in Canada you want to visit, let's say you're going to visit Australia, right? Then you would know that it's the other side of the world. You've got to learn a bit about Australia. You've got to learn about their customs. You've got to learn about their immigration or their way to get in and the way to get out of the country, don't you? You've got to learn these things. Now, for an English-speaking country, that's not so difficult. But let's say you decide you want to visit, I don't know, Venezuela. Now there'll be a whole different set of things you're going to have to learn and prepare for before you travel. And if you go unprepared, you might not even be let into the country if you're unprepared. If you haven't got the right visas, you won't be let in. And you can think of the spirit life as the same way. Unless you have the appropriate visa, you are not going to get into the next sphere or the higher sphere or condition. And unless you have the appropriate visa, if you like, to get beyond the sixth sphere, you will never get there. And that visa is all about receiving God's love. That's the visa. That's the pass. That's the way you pass from the sixth to the seventh and then into the state of the eighth sphere, which is classified as at one with God. You have to have received some of God's love in order to do that. Now, God's not saying you have to do it. He's just saying in order to get to that location, you're going to have to do it. Now, there's a whole slew of reasons why. And one of the reasons is because in your mind, there are things above the sixth sphere that cannot be understood by the mind. Every area above the sixth sphere is designed that your emotions have to be engaged rather than just your mind. So the trouble with your mind and the problem with the mind on earth is it's become so dominant. And while you're dominant in your mind, you are thinking, my mind is supreme. My mind is going to get me to the place I want to be. But that's not the case. Above the sixth sphere, your mind has to be given up, actually. In the seventh sphere, the whole reason for that sphere is to help people go through the process of releasing their mind dominance and becoming emotionally dominant, soul dominant. That's what happens in the seventh sphere. That's the process you have to go through in the seventh sphere. To reach at one with God, you're going to have to do that. Right? Now, if you don't want to reach a one with God, well, then you don't have to do it. But if you want to be a one with God and have this sort of everlasting progress that can continue beyond the perfect natural man, you are going to have to do it. There is no choice. And you get to the stage where you go, I want to do it, because why wouldn't I want to do it? If that place is more loving, more beautiful, more blissful, why wouldn't I want to experience that thing that I wouldn't be able to experience as a perfect person? So there are a time in your future where you're going to have to give up the mind. It makes sense? In this process of progress. So your sincere longings are not generated by your mind. They're generated by your feelings. The problem with sin is that sin also affects your feelings. You have feelings for things that are out of harmony with love when you sin. So you can be using your mind to try to generate a sincere longing for God, and you can use your mind to try to not sin, and it's useless to you. You still will not get beyond the sixth sphere of the spirit world in your future if you do that. So even if you become completely sinless by using your mind to work through every one of your sins, you will not reach the seventh sphere of the spirit world. The visa to get into the seventh sphere is having received God's love to a certain degree, and also having come to understand that your emotions are far more important than your mind. To the point where you don't really worry about what you think about anymore. There's no thought anymore. There's only feelings that drive thoughts. Right? That transition must occur. Now, let's look at yesterday. When we had the discussion about pets, as soon as we identify the sin and present some logic about the sin, can you see the general thing that happens is I start worrying in my mind, oh no, what am I going to do now? I've got a pet. What do I do with that? Well, my children have got a pet. What do I do with that? You know, you start worrying in your mind, and then in your mind, the thing that starts up is, if it's a sin, then I need to stop it. So what I'll do is I'll change my life from my decision-making process in my mind. I'll change my life some way to stop that particular sin. That doesn't change anything from God's perspective. If you want a relationship with God, you've got to change your feelings about it, not just your mind. And if you remember a lot of the comments that were made yesterday, a lot of you were had reactions to the discussion on pets, right? You had a reaction, and probably last night, a bit of a reaction too, possibly, right, for some of you. And those reactions are your mind fighting this for its sin, while at the same time the soul is going to have to give up its sin. This introduces a conflict inside of you. Are you going to do the right thing only intellectually, or are you going to only do the right thing when you feel the right thing to do? What are you going to do? Now, you can stop things intellectually. You can. You can stop doing a sin intellectually. You can make a decision to stop using your mind. You make a decision to stop the sin and be firm with yourself about stopping the sin and making sure you stop the sin and being conscious of it every day. And you can do that. That's what every person who's progressed to the sixth sphere historically has done. That's how they got there. And you can do that. And you can work through the feelings you have about that as you do that, because you will have feelings when you try to stop an action that you really want. So if you really want a pet and you need to stop having one, then you can see, I really want one, but I need to stop having one if you believe you need to. And then you're going to end up in this sort of state, aren't you, where your feelings are saying have one and your mind's saying don't have one. And eventually this war, the battle that's going on between your feelings and your mind, is going to have to be resolved in order for you to calm down, in order for you to become relaxed and peaceful again. This is one reason why a lot of people don't want to hear about their sin, right? Because every time they hear about a sin, there's an internal battle. The internal battle ramps up inside of yourself, and it's very uncomfortable, and it feels like now there's no peace. And this Jesus guy has just brought me no peace to my life now, right? And that's the way we think. We go, well, how do we deal with that? Oh, we just avoid him, and then we get to have some peace. But it's not going to work that way for you in the spirit world. Like, it's got nothing to do with me. It's got everything to do with God's law and what that's going to demand of you, right? And so at some point you'll come to realise that, and then realise there is a battle going on between the sin that's inside of you and then the methods you use to reduce that sin, to change that sin. And you have a choice of using a method, which is the perfect natural man's method, which is use your mind, shut down the desire to do the action, or feel the desire to do the action but don't do it, and then go through this internal conflict until that conflict is resolved emotionally. And that what will be required for you to change most sins if you progress towards the perfect natural man. And that's going to take a lot of time. Right? The average person to reach from Earth to the sixth sphere takes 200 years. Once they know what to do. Now, it may take them 1,000 years to learn what to do, and then 200 years to do it. The average person takes 200 years. It's very rare. We have met some people who have taken 50 years, but they've lived a very moral life on Earth, which is not what we see happening very much nowadays. But historically, the average person, 200 years, once they become aware of their sin, it takes them 200 years to sort themselves out. Can you see, if I don't become aware of the sin, it might take thousands of years. There's people we know from our first century life who are still in the same place they arrived in the spirit world, in the hells, as they were 2,000 years ago, because they haven't even become aware yet of their sin, let alone desiring to change it. Right? So it's going to require from you a decision, a choice, a decision. What are you going to choose to do? And also it's going to require a choice as to which way you're going to use to progress. Are you going to use the method to progress that is using your mind and mind dominant, or are you going to use this method to progress that involves receiving God's love and progress that way, which becomes very emotionally dominant? Those are the methods that are available to you. There are no other methods. I know the world says there is, but there isn't. Every other thing they say is all just slight variations of the mind method. You know? So when they talk about neuro-linguistic programming, or when they talk about, dealing with energy, or when they talk about, all other forms of progress, well, they're all just using mind, right? And none of them are God's way. And so there's really just two paths. And this is what I said in the first century to everyone. There's really just two ways. There's the broad way, which most people take, right, that leads to the perfect natural man. In the Bible, it's now quoted as leading to destruction, which is not the case. I said it was leading to the perfect natural man. And then there's the narrow way that leads to infinite growth and life. God's way. They are the two ways. And every way that humankind have come up with and imagined themselves to have on earth has all been just the broad way, a part of the broad way. The broad way is like hundreds of thousands of different ways, all determined by different people and different suggestions, and they all end up at the same place. So in the end, it's just a great big wide way using all different methods to get to the same place. Right? And then there's this narrow way, which is a method that is the only way that God has defined to enter this relationship with God to the point where you become at one with God and can live in a place of bliss that's forever progressing, always progressing, never staying the same. You think if you reach the sixth sphere, let's say it takes you 2,000 years to reach the sixth sphere, let's say. And you reach the sixth sphere and then, you're there for 100,000 years. Imagine. Now, I know for many of you, 100,000 years is like hard to even imagine. But imagine after 100,000 years that you still haven't moved from the sixth sphere. You're living the same life you were living 100,000 years ago. How's that going to feel? Can you see after a while it's going to grate on you probably, right? It's going to end up feeling like, what's next? You're going to wonder, what's going on? Like I progressed to get here and now I can't progress anymore. What's happening? Is this the limit of my destiny? And in fact, in the sixth sphere, there are colleges, what you would classify as universities on Earth, examining that one question as how they can reach the seventh sphere. without God, of course. So they're trying to work out how. And it's actually a physical impossibility because you can't get there unless you've received some of God's love. Right? And you can't even understand the place unless you've received some of God's love. Right? So if we look at our discussion yesterday, you can see we raised the pet issue. Just one tiny... Remember, we talked about the hierarchy of sin, and the pet issue is really the physical, right? On the physical level, choosing to have a pet is a physical sort of decision. Of course, there's a lot of emotions and spiritual beliefs driving that decision, which are more important actually than dealing with the physical problem, for dealing with the physical problem. But if you look at that one decision and you go, it took us an hour and a half to flesh it out, and most of you are still not very convinced, right? How long is it going to take you to resolve an issue of sin that's bigger than that? Can you see it? Sort of like, what kind of humility is it going to require from me to deal with something bigger than that? Something that is not even really about me, about a pet, and it's already taking me an hour and a half to even get to the stage of having a reasonable discussion about it, to look at the picture. And of course, we didn't look at the whole picture of it in that hour and a half. We could have spent a day or two. Is it going to take a day or two with everything? Well, obviously, if it's a physical thing and it takes a day or two, and there's hundreds of physical things we can do wrong in any moment. And then if you look at the hierarchy, let's look at the sexual issue that we discussed yesterday. Could you feel in the group how you were right there discussing the physical issue about pets for the majority of you? Some of you are a bit bored with the subject, but others of you were right there, right? But then when it came to the sexual issue, it's sort of like, whoa, now things are starting to get a bit challenging. Emotionally challenging, future challenging, relationship challenging. Now, that was just a sexual issue. We hadn't even got to an emotional one yet. Of course, it triggered a lot of emotional things, didn't it? We haven't even got to what it triggered yet. And we're just discussing the actual issue. Now, if we're going to get that shut down, looking at just what are very low on the scale of the issues that we need to examine, can you see it's going to take us a long time to sort ourselves out? You follow? Do you want to take that long? And see, what most people do is they go, wow, an hour and a half to discuss the pet issue, an hour and a half on the sex issue, and I'm starting to get like I don't really want to hear it anymore, and I don't want to need to make some decisions in my life about it. Where are we going to go from that with the emotional issues and the spiritual issues? See, I want to raise some emotional issues and spiritual issues with you today, right? And then we look at those two issues. If we're already starting to get shut down with those issues, the ones that are easy to understand, then how are we going to go with the ones that are more difficult and that involve me having to feel some things? That's going to be interesting, isn't it, as to what we do with that. So what I'm suggesting is this. The reason why we're doing this discussion with you is because we want to create an awareness. But I don't want to force an awareness on you. What you will need to do for your own future is desire awareness on your own. Like, someone is not going to be on your shoulder. In one of the other presentations we said it's like you have angel on one shoulder and like the devil on the other shoulder, as the saying goes. And each of them trying to influence what you do. Well, the problem with the angel that's on one of your shoulders, and there's plenty of good spirits around you who want to help you progress, is that they respect your will. You could say it's not a problem, but if they respect your will, and your will is, I don't want to listen, or I don't want to hear, how are you going to get help? If that's your will. If your will is, I want to stay with my sin because it's too challenging otherwise, if that's the will, then they're going to go, fine. If you want to take 10,000 years to reach the perfect natural man, take 10,000 years. Not advisable, Because the perfect natural man's a better place than any place you've ever experienced on earth. And you can have it on earth if you wanted to. You could be the perfect natural man on earth even. But the angel who has received God's love, who might be on his shoulder, he's saying, well, why would you want even that? Why, when you can have this other thing which is far in extreme with regard to bliss, like extreme happiness, extreme bliss, and forever progressing into more and more capability, more and more power, more and more expression, more and more joy. Why wouldn't you want that for your future? Something that's not limited. So by the time 1,000 years or 10,000 years comes along, you're not feeling limited. You're feeling like you're in a place of growth all the time. See, on earth, we are very addicted to obtaining what we believe makes us happy and then holding on to it for dear life. Right? And from that point, we're really saying, don't change anything. Right? Don't change anything, because if I lose what I've got, there's a fear of losing what we have. And if I lose what I've got, then my life will be unhappy again. And I don't want it unhappy again. But the problem with that concept is that we're having no faith that we can progress to have more and more. We can progress not more and more physical things, but more and more happiness, more and more joy. We can progress more and more. And we need to at some point have some faith in that. So with the process of looking at our sin, we need to have some faith that becoming aware of it is a good thing. Not a bad thing. It's a good thing for me. It's going to help me. It's going to make me happier. It's going to help me be more aware and more awake to what's going on around me. I'm going to feel things more. I'm going to be able to make quicker decisions. I'll be able to make more happy decisions that are better for my future if I'm more aware. It's a good thing, not a bad thing. But you can see from yesterday when we talked about what are you going to do with your pet, most of you go, it looks to me like every option's a bad thing. Keeping it means I'm sinning. Then how do I get rid of it? How do I take responsibility? I give it away to another person. Then I'm causing them to sin. So I can't really, in good conscience, do that. What do I do? And a lot of times you'll end up with the thing, well, this animal, which is destroying the environment and other things as a result of my attitude, I change my attitude and I realise I don't want to keep this animal anymore, but now the animal is in my household, reminding me every day of my past sin. Right? What am I going to do about it? And the average person will go, I'll just wait for it to pass. And if that's 10 years, they'll live with that for 10 years, rather than actually making more loving choice than that. Right? And the reason why we will do that is because we don't want to confront the full extent of our sin, which is that we don't want to repair the damage of our sin. You see, for most of us, when we recognise a sin, we want to go, please forgive me for the sin. And if we direct that at God, it's please forgive me, God, for that sin. And we're hopeful that God's just going to go, right, you're all forgiven. And there's no consequences anymore. Even if you are sincere in your request for forgiveness, God does not wipe out the consequence. The consequence being the effect of the sin. The effect of the sin will continue until you do something about it. So if you teach something that's wrong, the effect of that sin will continue until you do your best to teach the right thing instead. If you engage a sin on earth and continue that sin and then stop it and ask for forgiveness and can be forgiven, after that point the effect of your sin will continue, because that's what the problem with sin is. And it won't continue inside of you because you've been forgiven. It will continue outside of you, and you'll notice it and you'll feel about it. And you'll go, whoa, look at that. I created a sin And even though I now know I'm forgiven, I'm still needing to sort out the fact that I created that sin. So I have friends in the spirit world who are now at one with God, but are still working on trying to correct the effect of their sin while they're on earth. Trust me, it's far better to not sin than do that. But that is a requirement. And when I say it's a requirement, you feel it inside that it's a requirement. You'll feel it. If you've done something that has continued and done something wrong, you'll feel, once you receive God's love and you are forgiven for what you've done, you'll feel the requirement of correcting the effect of it. And you'll want to. It won't be like, oh, I have to. It'll be like, I have to because I want to. Like it needs to be done. And I did this, so I need to correct it. And that's how you'll feel. Far better to not sin. Far better. So, the reason why most of us struggle with this is because when it comes to the sin, it's like, I don't want to know. I just want to make out it's not there or just ignore it where I possibly can. Right? And that attitude is going to slow your joy. It's going to slow down your potential for happiness. It's going to slow down your ability to receive truth. It's going to slow down your ability to feel through specific emotions. It's going to make your life like treacle, glue, where you feel stuck in a place for long periods of time. That's what it's going to do to you if you have that feeling. It's far better to have the feeling, I want to change. I want to grow. Now remember, God is not going to force you to exercise your free will to grow. He's not going to do that. It's something you're going to have to exercise if you want to grow. So that's what I would like to remind you of. And looking at yesterday's conversation, you can see it's good to get head up about things. You understand? Because you can at least feel the passion in you about, oh, I don't like that idea and this is not good and what's being said to me. And as somebody put up their hand yesterday, you telling us we should kill our pet and, all this kind of thing. It's good to get head up about these things in the sense of feel the emotion of it, but also contemplate, why is it so hard for me to see the love or the lack of love in something? It should be relatively easy for me to see it, shouldn't it? If you think about it. We all claim to have some level of love, and we all claim to love our partners and love our children and love the environment, even many of us claim. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts of seeing our behaviour, the average person doesn't want to see it. And this is why the earth is in the place it is. Because the average person would like to live in a facade about their real state. They'd like to live in a facade that they love. They would like that. To get out of that is going to require this quality of sincerity. The ability to examine one's own heart and to feel that I want to make changes because what I'm doing now is not good enough. Not just not good enough for me, but not good enough for my partner, for my family, for my environment, for the world itself. And you don't have to be self-condemnatory. You just need to get into a state where you want to make change. Right? It doesn't require you, like the Catholics used to do. They get out a whip and every day whip themselves for their sins in penance. It doesn't require that. God doesn't require that of you. What he would like to see is your desire to change. Right? So he doesn't want you to go into all this self-punishment and, attacking yourself. Because that's like the Catholic man with his whip, beating his own back. But he wants you to recognise and become aware that the sin is there and you can change it. It's your creation, you can change it. He didn't create it. He created laws to help you get over it. And you can change it if you engage those laws. That's what he wants you to know. So when we look at these issues, we really want to, if we can focus ourselves when we look at these issues on this particular part of the issues, the principles. We want to make sure that we grasp the principles, not just the little individual sins, but the principle of how to resolve it. So yesterday we discussed some principles, and most of you forgot them during the discussion. Now the principles were that firstly there's a conscience. And with any issue you can receive God's truth if that conscience is open enough to receive it. And you saw yesterday that if the conscience is not open, it becomes a lot more difficult to discover whether something is true or false, right? From God's perspective. Now, if the conscience is open, then on that particular subject it's open to, we can receive the truth very quickly, and as a result we will know and start to begin this process of awareness that we need. Right? We can. The conscience is saying this is wrong or right. That's all it needs to say. Is it wrong to keep pets? You'll find you can ask specific questions, more specific than that, can't you? Is me keeping a pet under the current circumstances wrong or right? For me. Right? Now, in the case of a farmer who's using his animal to help him farm some for wool, he's going to have a more righteous answer, isn't he? Because he's doing it for other reasons than just himself, right? But in the case of a person who's just got a pet in the home and there's no other purpose than to keep this pet tied up in the home or constrained in the home for most of its life, other than to meet the emotional addictions of the individual, then of course the answer is going to be pretty clear. But the trouble is, for most of us, we still have to guess the answer because we're not hearing it. And the reason why we're not hearing it is because we're so blocked to hearing truth from God generally that now we've got to use our logical brain, our mind, to determine whether it's loving or not. And that is going to be very subject to what I believe love is. And if I have a very injured view of love from God's perspective, then I'm going to believe I'm doing something loving while God's feeling you're sinning. So the problem with you being the arbiter is that you're coming from your own sin. So already the decision making that's going on in your mind is tainted by your own sin. And this is the difficulty of sin. The difficulty of sin is that it taints even the way you think and what you believe. It taints your belief systems that you've imbibed over the course of your life to support the sin. And so it's going to be difficult to become aware of it because of these taints that exist. And that is the internal battle that each of you are going to find the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. You know? And every person who's ever done it has felt that. The hardest thing they've ever done in their life was to give up their sin, to work through their sin. So, this awareness is a very, very important thing to get. And the desire to have it is more important than having it, really, isn't it? Because without the desire to have it, you'll never have it. Can you see? So unless you desire awareness, then awareness is never going to come. Now, of course, when I say never, it's very hard for awareness to never come, because God's designed a whole heap of laws just to make the soul aware. Right? Most of the laws that are governed by remember in this pyramid we said that all of the laws above the physical are all for the purpose of guiding the soul. Right? So all of those laws that begin with the sexual laws and up through the emotional laws and spiritual laws, all the principles that govern how your soul works, are eventually going to get you to be aware. You can go through it two ways. You can go through it reluctantly or with desire. The people who do it reluctantly often take thousands of years. The people who do it with desire take a few years. The net result is going to be happiness. Right? Not just for you, but for people around you as well. That would be the net result. Unfortunately, most of us don't have faith that giving up our sin is going to create happiness. And that is our substantive problem. We lack the faith that getting rid of addictions, getting rid of sins, is going to result in me being happier than I am. Many of us believe you give up an addiction, you just get sadder. I remember talking to a man who enjoyed his alcohol and his smoking, and he was saying, if I gave this up, I wouldn't know what to do with my life. And I'm saying, what do you mean? You mean that you're totally dependent on your happiness for alcohol and smoking, tobacco? He said, yeah, they're the only things that I have that are good in my life. This man, he drank 24 beers a day. He bought, in Australia it's called a slab, and he would drink the whole slab every night. Right? He was a painter. So he'd go out painting during the day, earn his money, and a fair portion of his money got spent on drinking at night. And he was so unhappy with the rest of his life. He had no relationship, hardly any good friendships. Everything he did was based around alcohol and smoking. He said without his smokes, he would be a complete nervous wreck. And he needed his smokes to keep him going. Now, can you see that's a very unhappy life, isn't it? That you're not experiencing any joy except for the things you imbibe, drink or eat. And that's the only joys you experience in life. That's a man who needs to change his life. Right? But this is the interesting thing. Most of us think the very addictions that are harming our life are actually helping it. And that's why we don't want awareness of the sins, and awareness of how they affect us. So, today, if we can always come back to the principle of what we're trying to understand. So we're going to get involved in some more discussions about different principles regarding emotion and spiritual principles as well, where we have sins. And what we would like to do is come back to this principle of, okay, how am I feeling about becoming aware of them? Am I feeling like I want to resist the process, I want to fight it, I want to argue for my sin, I want to fight and say I'm all good when I'm not? What do I want to do? Do I want to fight for that sin? Or am I going to come to some awareness of it? And once I become aware, of course there's a process that needs to occur before you become awake to it, after becoming aware. Awareness is just the beginning of the process, but without awareness, you're never out of denial. And if you can't get out of denial, you also are not going to be able to establish a very close bond with God and in that relationship. And there's good reasons why that is the case, and one of the major reasons why is because God's love is not in agreement with sin. So in order to receive it, we must be repentant for our sin. Because God's love is not in agreement with our sin. God's really saying, that sin is unloving. That sin is unloving. That sin is unloving. It's not, God's saying to you, it's not my standard of love. That's why it's sin. And if you have God's standards of love, you will have the ability to be live even a blissful life on earth, not just in the spirit world, but on earth. That is all ahead of all of you if you wanted it. But it's going to require dealing with your relationship with sin, not just your relationship with God. It's going to require how much do you want your sin? How much do you think you need it? How much do you think it satisfies you? And are you going to become aware of it enough to want to change it and get to the stage where you have a desire and a belief that changing it is good for you? Is that going to happen? Right? So that's what I would like to focus on today. We want to get we're going to get into some more things about emotions and spiritual things today. And maybe we may revisit some other things physically and sexually as well, right? But in the process, what we want to do is focus on, okay, how am I feeling about this now? And be honest about how we're feeling about it. Because if you look at the discussion yesterday, the sexual discussion, did you feel how more subdued everybody became? Because you feel that, you can feel the mood of the audience even about how subdued you become when an issue challenges you more. For many of you, the pet issue didn't challenge you very much, and so you could, discuss it and feel about it and be relatively open about it. But when it comes to sexual matters, most of the time, most of us find them more challenging for lots of different reasons. And then that causes us to get all subdued, and the mood then gets depressed. Now we're not in a state of desire of wanting to know why it's a sin. We're not sort of experimenting with, oh, why is that? Why does that happen? So the thing I'd like to recommend to you is this. And this is something I've recommended all of my life, right from the first century. You remember it as a quote from the Bible that says, unless you become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of God. Right? Many of you who are Christian would have heard that statement. What that means is, how does a little child treat truth? Does it treat the truth with resistance and avoidance, or does it have a fascination for it? Which one is it? It's a fascination, isn't it? A little child goes, why, Daddy? Why, Daddy? I don't know, any of you are mum or dads, you would have at some point experienced this, right? Where, why does that happen? Then when you tell them why is that true then? And then tell them why is that true? And you get to a place where sometimes you don't even know why yourself, right? And so it becomes very difficult. And so it's like, why is the sky blue, Daddy? And I go, well, I better go and investigate why the sky is blue, just so I can answer that question. And the child is not... he's not judgmental about the answers he's getting, is he? He's assessing without being judgmental. He's open to the ideas and the concepts, and he's open to them being proven through further questions and discussion. Right? That's how the attitude of the child. Many times as adults, we become so arrogant that we don't have that attitude anymore with life. But we are in in your first incarnation, which all of you here are, you're in the infancy of your life. You think there are people who have lived on this earth who are now 180,000 years old. And how old are you? Like 90, 80, 70, 60, 100, even if you're 100. You're young. For them, it's like baby young. You understand? Yeah, they've lived 1,800 or more times more life than you have. Right? Baby young. So don't give up the attitude you had as a child of seeking, searching for more truth, finding it. God will reward that search. In the first century, I used to say to people, keep on seeking, keep on knocking, and it will be open to you. Yeah? Many of you who are Christians would have heard that statement too, right? And that's what I meant, to keep this attitude of a child seeking for more, seeking for more, seeking for more. Learn to become a student of life for the sake of your own happiness, but also for the sake of the happiness of those who you will come to love, which won't be just limited to your family or your friends. in the future. It'll be everyone you meet, you know. So can we do that today? Have that seeking, right? Yesterday afternoon in the sex discussion, the seeking attitude stopped. Yeah? Because many were challenged by the soulmate discussion and, you know, all that stuff can get pretty challenging, yes? And what do I do? And what about my future? And there's all these feelings that start coming up. And the trouble with a lot of these feelings is they stop the seeking attitude. If you can maintain a seeking attitude, you'll eventually arrive at the truth. Yeah? So if we can keep that attitude, we're going to do well as a group. Now, yesterday, I felt you did pretty well in the pet discussion. There was a seeking attitude. But when it comes to the sex discussion, not so much a seeking attitude anymore. And there's things we'll discuss today. You have a seeking attitude or not. Now, every time you seek, more truth will come to you. Right? And you need to each learn that you can seek for it. You don't have to be reliant on another to have done their search and then they tell you. You can seek for it. And in fact, eventually, God's law, when you have a relationship with God, God's truth, or you could say the search for truth, will be written on your own heart. It'll become a part of you. You'll feel it as a feeling that what the truth is. And you'll be able to instantly look at any situation and know what the right thing to do is. Straight away. You'll know what the loving thing to do is and what is going to bring the best outcome in the long term. Not just the instant gratification outcome, but the best outcome. Yeah? And if you have that seeking heart, it's going to benefit you for the rest of your existence. Right? Not just here on earth, but everywhere. There's so many things in the spirit world to learn about. You know, the spirit world is like a superset of anything you could learn on earth. So, you know, biology on earth, fascinating. But in the spirit world, superset of that, you know. When it comes to any scientific understanding, physics, chemistry, superset of that in the spirit world. There's just more and more and more to learn. And the person who has a seeking heart is going to enjoy life, learning and receiving the benefits of the learning for yourself. And in the process of learning for yourself, there are some things you might discover that no one else has ever discovered. And then you'll benefit everybody from what you discover as well. Right? That's the benefits of learning. So that's what I encourage today, yeah? Yeah. We can do that? Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'll go for another half an hour, and now we're open to questions again and discussion, right? So let's focus back on this awareness. And we want to focus on sins that are emotional in nature. In other words, laws that govern our emotions. Yeah. So laws that affect our emotions, when we break those laws, obviously we sin, and there will be an effect. And if we live in harmony with those laws, we'll benefit and we'll be living a happy life as a result. Okay? You want to? So microphone, just keep your hand up. So that's it.
Okay. I'd like to jump in right where I closed down in the sex yesterday. The talk on the sex. When we came to the part about so in the beginning of the relationship, the honeymoon period, there's lots of sex.
Yeah.
And then later on in the relationship, so I'm thinking like later after children, and there's small children in the house, and there's a grandmother with Alzheimer's, and Mama is very, very exhausted.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I shut down yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you can understand why, because the circumstances. You can understand why you'd shut down sexually as well, right? Because the circumstances are you're tired. What are you going to do to change your life so you're not tired? See, children shouldn't make you tired. If the children are appropriately, have laws established in your household, actually they'll add to the benefit of the household. It's only when the children are lawless that they're going to make you tired.
So teaching the children God's ways.
Yep, and particularly about laws, right? And also establishing laws in the household of what they're allowed to do, what they can't do, And they've got to contribute to their own life. They've got to, by the time they should be 2 or 3, they should be cooking, cleaning after themselves. 3 years of age, by the time of that, we've got some children in Australia we've been helping the parents with, and by the time they were 3, they cook in their own meals, they prepare their own meals, they don't go shopping yet. By the time they're 5, they're given a budget and they go shopping for themselves.
Eli started shopping. He's got his own trolley, but
Oh,
he
yeah.
can't pay.
He can't pay yet. No, Eli 3 he's doing his own shopping, and Mum will tell him, no, that's no good. You can't have those lollies, no, and explain to him why and whatever. But he goes through the checkout, puts his gear on the table, goes through the whole process of right. When he comes home, he cuts up his own food. He prepares his own food. He knows when he should go to sleep because when he's tired, and if he doesn't, then there's laws that are enacted to change that. So by the time he's 4 or 5 or 6, he should be a breeze, right? So when you want some sex with your husband, he'll be going, "I'll clear out. You've got your time," right? There won't be any problem there with the children. Now let's look at mother with Alzheimer's. What decisions are we making? If you're unable to care for a person by yourself and you're finding it very, very difficult to care for a person by yourself, then you've got to consider, don't you, to make some different decisions. Now, usually, unfortunately, in the household, it's left often to the woman, isn't it, to care, right? She's the one who's viewed as the nurturer or the carer, and so you're taking on a role. So you've got to start looking at, why do I take on this role? And why does my mother have Alzheimer's in the first place? Right? And am I paying for her choice? Right? See, this is a thing that most people won't face with regard to diseases on earth of all kinds, is that most of them are caused by the person's individual choices. Right? And so we've got to come to a point where on earth where we all understand the personal responsibility of the disease. That there's something going on inside of me that causes me to want to attract this disease to me, that I need to address. And if I became more loving with it, I probably wouldn't have the disease. But let's say the person has it, because I haven't done all that. Right? Then is it right for you to pay the penalty of somebody else not dealing with their own sins? No. So what are you going to do about that? How bad does it look when you say, I don't want to care for my mum anymore? It looks bad, right? And so for the majority of people, what they will do is they will go, that looks bad. I'm not going to make that decision because it looks bad. I don't want to look bad. It's more important to me to not look bad than do the right thing. And so what I'm going to do, instead of exhaust myself for the rest of my life until this person passes, and the person might get Alzheimer's in their 60s and pass in their 90s, so you're talking like 30-year program of looking after someone who doesn't even know you anymore, doesn't even want to know you anymore, right? And why? Why do we do these things? And most of the time it's done because we're worried about what people think of us. We worry because there's all sorts of community endeavours to sort these kind of issues out. There's all sorts of things that can be done actually to actually encourage people who don't want to remember their life to remember it. There's things that can be done to reverse Alzheimer's, right, as well, by, there's music things, but they're going to have to cope with emotion at some point. And the reason why they've got Alzheimer's is they don't want to, right? And that's going to have to be addressed. And they're using their will still to not deal with anything. So are you going to support that? There's going to be tough decisions needing to be made here, right? As to what do we do with people as a community, as a whole earth? What do we do with people who do not want to be personally responsible? What are we going to do with those people? We've got to come up with some solutions. those of you who are caring for someone, you're in the prime seat to come up with some loving solutions, because you know the hardships. You know what's involved, you know the feelings involved, you know what you're going to have to work through feeling-wise to do it. Now, if you did all of those things, so the question was about sex, right? But if you did all of those things, you wouldn't feel exhausted. And if you don't feel exhausted, then that would no longer be an excuse to not have sex. Would it? The problem is, for most of us, we don't want to do those things. And that's why we end up in the situations we end up. We don't want to make some hard decisions. With our children in particular, we don't want to make some hard decisions. And with our parents who are resisting their feelings, any parent of yours who is resisting their feelings now is likely going to end up in a state where they don't remember large portions of their life, to the point where they don't remember their life at all. So you can start educating your own parents when they're in their 40s or 50s, you know. If you're in your 20s and they're in their 50s and they're trying to tune out of all the things they've done in their life and tune out of their feelings about it, you can talk to them about it. That can help undo the potential things that are going to happen to them in their future. But you're going to have to be brave to do it, because they're going to fight with you and get resistive and get annoyed with you, to the point where some of them are just not going to be a part of your life anymore. They'll go to that extreme, and then you won't have to care for them. Because they won't even want you around to do it, right? So I'm not saying to do it for that motive, but oftentimes that's the end result, right? And so a lot of times it's because we do not want to confront an unloving situation and actually deal with it in the moment that we end up in places of exhaustion. And as a result of that, it's going to have an effect on the joy of your own life. And because sex requires time for people to spend time together, it requires romance, it requires a number of things from us. When we're exhausted, we don't feel inclined towards those things. Of course, that makes it more difficult. And yet that relationship, the romantic relationship, can bring a lot of joy to your life. So what you end up doing is sacrificing, like, desire for approval from others and desire to be thought of as good and all these kind of things. You end up sacrificing the joy of your own life for those things. And that is not good for you. Yeah? So I'm not suggesting you don't care for people, but there are certain things you can do firstly in preparation for what is coming, but also things you can do when you're in the situation to buy you more time. And it's going to require cooperation of both parties in the relationship, isn't it, as well? Because one thing that happens with a lot of men is when you start caring for someone else more than you care for them physically, the men start getting pretty annoyed with that as well, right? That often happens, and then that causes a degradation of the relationship as well, right? As women, if you're invested in the perception that you're a good mother and invested in the perception that you're a good person, you are going to make very bad decisions for yourself. Unloving decisions for yourself. Yeah. So these investments are going to have to be dealt with. They're out of harmony with love. God didn't design you to be a mother. God designed you to be a person who's able to procreate, right? Which any woman on earth can do, right? So God's purpose for you in your future isn't to be a mother. God's purpose for you in your future is to learn who you are and engage that nature and personality to its fullest extent. You might be a scientist. You might be a chemist. You might be a biologist, really, in your heart. That's what you might be. But when you're so invested in just being mummy to somebody, you're going to give up the nature, your own nature. I don't have any problem with having children. I've had some of my own, right? Mary's had some of her own too, right? We've even had one together. And We have no trouble with having children. What we have problem with is when you're over-investing all of your addictions in your children and you're not developing yourself anymore. That's the problem. And that, of course, means, like the sexual relationship that you have with your partner and eventually with your soulmate is a part of your future development. If you're giving that up for the sake of anything else, you're giving up the wrong thing. Yeah? Make sense? Changes need to be made. Yeah. Good? Sandina?
I have a clarifying question about the consequences of sinning. So
The consequences of
sinning,
Yep.
yeah. So
Yep.
you said today that God doesn't force us to change.
Yep.
But I also heard you say that God is always destroying sinful things.
Yep.
So like, for example, like if we're in a relationship that is not our soulmate, and that's technically a sin,
Yep.
is God destroying that relationship? But
His
then-
laws are attempting to, yes.
Okay. So then where does our free will, I guess, come in? Or like...
Well, you have free will, but only in the structure, within the structure that God has created.
Yeah.
See, most people think when we talk about free will, it means you have free will to do anything. But surely all of you know that you can't do anything. Like, you can't create the sun, can you? You can't even walk near it without dying. In fact, if the earth didn't have the shield around it, you'd already be dead from the sun. Even 93 million miles away, you'd be dead. So you can't do anything yet. You're not going to be able to do anything. You're going to have to live within a structure of law. When we talk about free will, you have the will to decide for yourself what you are going to do, but God's also got his own will. And his own will says, you do that, and I don't agree. You do that, and I'm going to restrict you. You do that, and you're going to receive a penalty of some kind. You jump off a building, you're going to go splat. Right? He created the law that stops you from flying off the earth, with the law of gravity. But if you decide to live outside of its bounds, there's going to be a result. And that's God's will. He's allowed to make those decisions. He has the authority of the universe. He created your very soul and your two bodies, the potential of them being created. He did all of that. He has the right to determine what his structure is going to be and how much he's going to let you destroy it. Right? Now, God is willing to let you destroy this entire earth because he gave you the free will where you could become a scientist and work out a way to do it. Right? And there are ways you can destroy a whole planet, actually. Right? Fortunately, no one on Earth knows them yet, because we probably would have already done it, unfortunately. Right? But in history, there's been 3 or 4 times when there's been attempts made to so-called improve the Earth using technological means, which resulted in destruction of the Earth. And this is why we have the legends of Atlantis and Lemuria and other continents sinking. And all of these things happened because people tried to break the structure of God's laws to the extent that everything starts reacting and correcting it. So you have free will, you have the right to make a decision one way or the other, but God has free will too. He's allowed to have the right to make a decision about what he's going to do about that. Makes sense?
I guess, your gift, the gift that God's given to each of us, free will, is a pretty mighty gift, actually. And you look at the way that if we accept that God's laws are opposing unloving use of free will and rewarding loving use of it, and then we look at the world and we go, well, there's a lot of unloving stuff going on, that means this gift of free will is we're pretty much in charge of it, aren't we? It just comes down to a question of how much pain and suffering we are willing to endure in a lot of cases, isn't it?
And also how far God will let us go.
Yeah, because there is a limit. There's always a limit, but it's a pretty wide limit, and God is really trying to help us to first become aware through the incidents of pain and suffering, if we really don't want to know about God, to help correct that will. But obviously, as Jesus has been saying this morning, if we engage with God, we can correct that will much more quickly to get rid of sin, and then we become happier exponentially the more that we're in harmony with law. So God's really trying to educate us about how to use this amazing gift wisely, if you like. So that's why there is law and consequence, so that we can understand that. And the law...
But that's not the only purpose for law, though, is it? So,
No.
Because the purpose for law is to keep you alive and to keep you safe and to keep you secure and to keep you happy and to keep, to help you get to a state of bliss. God created a whole heap of laws for that purpose. There's a whole heap of laws that he engaged with regard to receiving his love that are only for that purpose. No other purpose than your extreme happiness. No other purpose. So, God created these laws not to create restrictions on your life and to make your life a drudgery, but God created these laws to keep you safe and keep you secure and help you through and become happy in your life. That's why he created them.
Yeah. And really, when you get rid of sin, that's how you become happy. So it's all educational in terms of how does my will impact on me, the world around me, and God's laws are just an expression of God's love in a very practical sense. So the law to be loving must act against sin. It must. Otherwise it wouldn't be loving, would it? It's like what we were talking about yesterday when there was the discussion about, well, is it my business to say anything when something's unloving? Well, yeah, because otherwise I'm supporting it. And it's really God's in the same position.
Yeah.
It's his business to say something when you're being unloving.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I think I have, when I get a consequence, I think I see it as punishment, or I feel it as punishment.
Yeah.
So
that's because we believe the sin brings us joy. So it's all about perspective, isn't it? When we believe the sin is going to bring us joy, and then it brings us a consequence that's negative, and we feel then we're going to get punished, we're basically not seeing, firstly, that the sin is not going to bring us joy. It never does bring joy, right? Even though there might be the instant illusion of it, there's always bad consequences for sin, always, right? And not only just for you, but also for many, many others. Your sin causes bad consequence for others as well. It's like the way we're destroying the earth at the moment is the next generation of children are going to have some bad consequences, aren't they? Right, so our sin is affecting even the next generation. And if we really loved others, we would see that. That even though our sin gives us the illusion that it's good for me, right? Like having autonomy, burning fossil fuels, and all these other things, using all this energy all the time, seems good for me, but is it good for the next generation and the next generation and the next generation? And then let's look at the whole principle of science being the solution to problems. Hasn't science so far been the cause of a lot of the problems? So how is it ever going to be the solution to the problem? Unless humans are more loving in the application of science, it is impossible for science to be more helpful with our future. It's only going to be more harmful, right? So unless we change our attitude even to science and the application of science, we've got to change there too. And the reason why I raise those things is because what we're seeing is that when God's laws is a standard, you could say God's laws are like a line drawn in the sand. It's not a wavy line either, by the way. It's a very
I always think that when you
it's a very like like ruler line, straight line. And when you cross it, the average person goes, well, I should have the right to cross it. Well, God doesn't feel you have the right to cross it. He feels he's given you the will where you can choose to cross it. There's a difference between you having a right to do it and having the freedom to do it. It's like you have the right to commit murder. Is that true?
Well, not legally.
You have the freedom to do it.
Yeah.
but it's not right, is it? It's wrong because it harms someone else's life. You have the freedom to rape, but is it right or wrong? It's obviously wrong because it's harming another person in their life. You have the freedom to be a pedophile, but is it right or wrong? Wrong, because it's going to harm a child and harm probably the rest of their life, right? So don't confuse freedom to choose with the right to do it. You understand? Yeah, don't confuse free will with righteous will. Right? The righteous use of will. They're not the same thing.
Okay, I have another question, but I don't know if how do we know if we're getting a consequence for a sin versus, so we're struggling, so let's say whatever, we're struggling like learning something, or maybe we've made some mistakes on the way.
Yep.
Like maybe being irresponsible or love of self or something.
Yep.
How do we know that we're getting a consequence, or if that struggle is just part of learning? Like, I don't know if you understand.
Or even a third thing, that struggle is a result of other people opposing us.
Yeah.
You know, there's often many reasons why we may feel ourselves to be in a personal struggle, and some of those reasons are personal in the sense that we have caused that struggle, and then some of those reasons can be that other people want to harm us and bring us that struggle, can't they? And then there could be just mistakes I've made, and the consequences of those mistakes need to be fixed. Now, if we look at each one, so let's firstly look at mistakes versus a purpose to sin versus others' sin and how that affects us, right? Because there's many other ways I could discuss this as well, but they're the three main ones I'd like to mention. From God's law's perspective, if you make a mistake, as long as you're willing to correct it, everything's done and dusted.
But it's not to say there's no pain, because there will be pain. It's like when you're riding a bike and you're learning and you fall off, it hurts. But it's not punitive, it's educational, if you like.
Yes, you're saying you're motoring along on a push bike. If you fall off again and you're doing 30 kilometres an hour, it's going to hurt. And it tells you straight away, don't do that. Like, oops, don't do that. Become more proficient at this thing you're doing. And so that you don't do that. You're hammering away with a hammer and you hit your thumb and it hurts like hell, right? And you go, don't do that in the future. Become better at hammering those nails without hitting your thumb with it, right? And after a while you learn that the more proficient you become, the less problems you have. So that's making a mistake and learning from it. And from God's perspective, making a mistake and learning from it is fine. You know, it's going to take time to be proficient in everything. When you were a baby, you had to learn how to walk. You fell over. You probably cried a few times. You know, you let go of the emotion and you got up and you walked again. And eventually now you walk, and how often do you fall over now? It's not only until you're 95 or something that you'll probably fall over again. And that will be because of muscular, atrophy or whatever is occurred. Once you become proficient at something, it becomes like natural. After that, the mistakes have been helping you learn. So there's no problem with those. God doesn't penalise you for your mistakes.
Before you rub that out, there is the issue, isn't there, say in a relationship where initially maybe we made a mistake, but then when we're confronted with that, if we don't want to correct it, now we've immediately gone into something that's purposeful.
Yeah, we've switched from there to there. You understand? Yeah. So when you innocently make a mistake and you're prepared to correct it and you're prepared to re-engage it more properly, more in harmony with the law has already done its work. There's no other penalty. But when you make a purposeful decision to continue making the mistake, now it can't be called a mistake anymore.
It's like, oh, I thought to love a man, I just have to like be a sexy mummy for him. I have to look after him and, make his dinner and do all that and be kind of sexy. And I think that's what Mum taught me, that's what Dad taught me. I get into this relationship.
Yeah.
And then
And the man's lapping all that up, right?
Yeah.
So he's receiving all that, thinking it's all great.
Yeah. And then I realised, oh crap,
Yeah.
that's not working out so well. I don't feel happy. And actually, I might even hear that's not a good thing. But then I go, oh, but I've invested so much in this relationship, and now I'm just going
I've
to
got
like...
a house with him, and I've got cars with him, and I've got children with him.
And now I'm going to start to like make excuses and go, well, maybe if I can just pressure him to change and see the problem, it'll be okay if we stay together. Or maybe it's not as bad as I think. And, all of that now, we've gone from a mistake to something I'm doing on purpose, and this is where... Well, now there's going to be more consequences because it's about how I'm using my will. It's not an innocent use of will now, it's an educated use of will. And so naturally you think that'd be logical, you'd want to have more consequence for that if you're an educator, if we think of God as the great educator.
He's an educator,
Yeah.
We're all his children, he's just educating us how to be adults. Most of us, when we pass earth, we're still not adults.
It'll take a fair bit of time.
And it takes a fair bit of time in the spirit world to become adults. When you enter the sixth sphere, that's the first time you become an adult. Until then, you're still a child. Doesn't matter how long that took. If it took 2,000 years, still a child for 2,000 years. Until you enter the sixth sphere, the perfect natural man, you're still a child. Right? That's the learning process that all of us will go through. And it doesn't matter whether we're receiving love from God or not. That's the process that's going to happen for all of us. Right? It's to get beyond that sphere requires the relationship with God and learning a lot of other things. Beyond being an adult, it's about learning how to be an angel, which is a different process, right? Yep.
All right, but you were going to talk about purpose.
Yeah, purpose. So now I'm engaging, as Mary's just mentioned, purpose in order to sin. Now that I'm engaging purpose to sin, obviously the consequence for my sin must be greater. Otherwise I wouldn't be correctable. Right? If it wasn't greater, you'd think, oh, well, having a mistake's the same as purposefully sinning, so I might as well purposely sin more often. Right? And that wouldn't be good for your future for a lot of personal reasons. You see, again, if I'm addicted to the concept that sin is good, which most of us on earth are, right, then naturally I think that if I'm limited, it's bad. But actually, from God's perspective, limiting your sin is good for you. It's going to make your life better if you can limit your sin and not let you just sin so much that eventually you destroy everything. Imagine if you could sin so much that you could destroy the whole universe. Right? Then God's whole creation would be wiped out. And God doesn't want that. So he placed restrictions on you. Right? And everything you do in purpose is obviously going to have more penalty than if you did it by mistake. The mistake usually has an instant consequence, which we recognise as a consequence, and then we make adjustments to correct that. Right? Done. Purpose, you're doing things on purpose. You can get the consequence, and sometimes it hardly has any effect on you. You still want to keep doing it on purpose.
Often you blame others in that state, don't you? Yeah.
Now, obviously, that has to be much higher penalties for purposeful sin. Right? Now, can I say you can do purpose in two ways. One is by omission, right? And one is by commission. Is that how it's spelled, commission? I don't think one of them is right. But anyway.
I don't know.
Two
There's two double.
One M for commission.
No,
No.
one M and omission.
Omission, sorry. Spelling. Right. Right, so when you have commission, sin of commission, that's when you know something is wrong and you do it. Sorry, commission. When you have a mission, you know something is right to do and you don't do it. Right? Both of those are done on purpose. Right? So you see a sick person and you don't want to do anything to help them. Well, that would be a mission. The best way to help them would be to help them with their emotions as why they got sick. That would be the best way to help them. But if I refuse to do that, that would be omission. If commission is a sin where you, on purpose, you decide you're going to do something that's wrong, right? Both of them are purposeful, right? Which are different to mistakes. Right? Now, when others sin, one thing we must recognise on earth is that your sin causes harm to others. So naturally, when others sin, it's going to cause harm to you. And at some point, you've got to recognise, is the pain and suffering I'm in the result of others' sin, or is it the result of my own? Now, example of that was I was killed on a stake in the first century. Like I was what you call a cross. It wasn't actually a cross. I was hung like so, nails, feet, and that's how I was killed. Now that method of dying was devised by someone else. It wasn't how I was going to naturally die. Right? And they decided they were going to take my life using that method. Now, I didn't blame myself for that. And it's interesting when you don't blame yourself for things, you don't feel as much pain with the thing happening either, which is an interesting thing that most people don't realise about pain, is that a lot of our pain happens because we're in fear and we blame ourselves for it. And a lot of times when we don't do that, we don't have as much pain. We're able to manage pain. But it was still painful, right? It hurt. But I didn't have the additional emotional pain, the additional spiritual pain, thinking that I was to blame for it. Yeah? It hurt for me, it was about 8 hours. It hurt, you know. But it wasn't, I didn't feel like all the emotional hurt of having done it to myself, any of that. I didn't think I was the cause of it. Yeah. Make sense? It was what somebody else chose to do. So they chose it, the law visited the consequence on them, and after they passed, I tried to help some of them. One of them I did help. You know him as Cornelius. Yeah? But others I couldn't help. And they received the consequence of their act. Right? Now, a lot of times when somebody does something to us and we have a tendency to blame ourselves for what they've done, that's when we start feeling like confused about who was to blame for what happened. And that's when we start saying things like, oh, the law of attraction brought me this event because of something wrong with me. No, it didn't bring you the event because of something wrong with you. It was a purposeful act by another person to hurt you. Right? And with people with free will, there's going to be that happen sometimes. If they're unloving, they will do that. The key is how you respond to that. What you're going to do about that will determine your purposeful action. So if you go into revenge, like you killed my son, I'm going to kill yours type of revenge, right? Then naturally now you're both very much at the same level of consequence, aren't you? But if you decide, I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to feel my feelings about my son dying instead, than trying to kill somebody else's son because mine died, can you see any consequence won't be visited on you? Yep. So the law measures all of these things very accurately, and as you go on in life, and particularly when you hit the spirit world and in the celestial spheres, you'll see how accurately. It's right down to the law is micron perfect, you know. It grinds down to the smallest atomic particle in terms of its perfection, the law does. Because it governs the smallest atomic particles, right? It grinds right down to the smallest particle. The law is firmly established and there's consequence for everything. So you start to appreciate how refined it is, and you end up having a lot of trust in it. Trust in God's goodness, that God did it the way God did it. Yeah.
But if you're trying to tell the difference, Yeah, what do you think is the way you're going to tell the difference, given everything we've just said?
Between those three?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough.
Probably assess, like with mistakes, it happens quickly, like the consequence is quick,
And your adjustment will be fast.
and my adjustment is fast.
Yeah, like getting up to walk again after you fell over and had a cry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then purpose is more, well, I know that I'm doing it.
And
Or
even
not.
if sometimes we don't want to admit to ourselves,
Yeah.
but if we're deeply honest, we're like,
Yeah,
no,
I know that's
yeah.
wrong, but we often don't even want to admit it to ourselves that we're doing it.
So it requires a lot of
Like,
self-honesty.
it's like a
doesn't
man
it?
who's expecting his wife, as Mary brought up earlier, to look after him and project sexy mummy feelings at him, basically is what she said, which means that she has to be sexy with him, but she also has to mummy him at the same time, right? And in other words, look after him, prepare his meals, do his washing and his ironing and all that stuff.
And tell him he's a
prop
good
him up,
boy, he's the
thinking
best
he's a
boy.
good, yeah, that's right, thinking he's the best man, right? And she's got to prop him up. Now, the average man receiving that knows that something's off, right? And the average woman doing it knows something's off,
Too good to be true.
right? Too good to be true, like you said.
When you awaken
It's
to your
too
sin,
bad.
you will think
Get
it's
it right.
terrible.
Like,
It's yucky.
it's bad, not good. Yeah. So the average person knows that there's something wrong with it, that it's quite, in fact, it's quite like yucky, like sleazy, isn't it, in a way, because it's like the person you've got a sexual relationship with is acting like your mother, you know, like, you know, so if you really feel about it, you know something's wrong, but the average person just says, oh, I'm getting the sinful benefit, what I think is the sinful benefit. I'm getting the instant pleasure from it, and so I'll accept it. People often say to me, but they want to do it, so why can't I receive it? If the other person wants to do it, then why shouldn't I go along? If, like one guy was saying to me, people want to look after me all the time, so why shouldn't I just let them look after me all the time? Right? So he knows that they're looking after him all the time in saying that comment. And this is the problem. Most of us do know. A lot of people think when they come to God, they go, but I made all these mistakes. And God says, you did it on purpose. You know, like, this is the trouble. It's like, for a lot of us, we're thinking, oh, please, no, it was a mistake. Like, you're driving along the road, you know, and there's speed sign, you just passed for said 90, and you go 95. Is it a mistake? You just saw it, and you still. And then when you get pulled over, it was close. Like, it was just a mistake, you know. And then you start even, you know, most people are tempted even going, I didn't know that sign meant that, and I didn't know. You know, we come up with all these reasonings, but actually, God's laws measure everything mathematically perfectly, and so you can't claim it's a mistake when from what the law is measuring is it wasn't. You know, you're not going to be able to do that with God. God's laws are perfectly not negotiable, and if it is a real mistake, God's law measures how real it was, right? And if it was a mistake but really done on purpose, again, God's law measures that. You know, so, and at some point in your future, the more experience you have with the law and living in harmony with it in particular, you'll recognise that more. Yeah.
Yeah. And also the conscience. The conscience is your great carry with you everywhere tool to, you know, go, hey,
Did
God,
I do that by mistake?
have I got a problem here? You know, is this other people, or do I also have something to look at? That kind of question.
That kind of question, yeah.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah. There's plenty of ways that God wants to help you work it all out. Yeah. The trouble for many of us is we'd like to believe there's no ways, because if we can believe there's no ways, then we can believe that everything we do is a mistake rather than being done on purpose. And then we can come to God when our sins are rolled before us, and by the way, in your soul is a stored record of all your sins. And when they are rolled before you, as will occur at some point in your future as well, and it's pretty confronting to have that happen, when it's rolled before you, you'll go, but that was a mistake, but that was a mistake, but that, you'll be going like that for a while, and that's because of this problem. Lack of awareness of the sin, a desire to deny the sin. Yeah. Well, it's time to have dinner, eh?
Yeah.
Have some lunch. So it's 1:45. So can you come back 1:15? That'd be great.
And can I just check with everyone, when we are standing here, can you see the board on this side?
Not really, can you?
No, it's not.
Can I bring the board
I'm wondering
forward?
if we can all sit on either side of the board or something. I just sense that.
Something like that? Is that
Can you see
better?
now? Yeah.
I can't turn it fully, so because otherwise people will know something.
Okay. And even with me standing, you can see that?
Yeah. Thank you.